Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this second session in a row of three that we are presenting to you, starting with return on investment of user experience, going to UX maturity, and then ending with customer centricity. But that's a session for next week that we will be presenting. Probably we'll see some people joining in during the course of the session. I already see that there's some more people that have or are joining. I don't know who was here last Wednesday, so just let me quickly run through some basic things, and I know that there's some people of you there that already know who I am. But my name is Geerts. I am a co-founder and partner at U.Sentric, and I am also research manager of the KU Leuven Digital Society Institute here at the university. What about U.Sentric? Again, a lot of you already know us. For those that don't, we were founded in 2007 already at the university, started there, but since then already more than 14 years of cross-industry experience in different sectors. We do user research, no market research. I think that's an important thing to say, because that's, of course, what the focus is of these sessions. And we are really focusing on the human aspect, human-centered design, putting the human persons at the center of all what we do. What do we do? Well, we have expertise in innovating, redesign, transformation in various contexts, companies, as long as there's a human factor to it and a human aspect to it. And we go from insight generation to ideation of generating new ideas to implementing, testing concepts, and making sure that it's a customer-driven market delivery there. Some key aspects that we do, making your end user, of course, is an integral part of what we do. And also we want to make that an integral part of your future as well, by involving users in the creation of new applications that are joyful, relevant, useful. So that's the user experience, actually. Also innovating by involving them in the creation of new services and products, involving users also in the creation of sustainable digital processes, which already brings us a bit to the next session, which is called user-centered digital transformation. And then also the creation of organizations or parts of organizations that are focused on end users as well, which means creating UX offices in companies or really building customer-centered organizations. And this is part of that whole trajectory. Of course, it's also training teams to discover the value and power of being user-centered. Okay, that having said, today we are going to delve into UX maturity models. Last Wednesday, for who was there, we looked at user experience, usability, human-centered design, and especially, okay, what is the return on investment of that? Really convincing sometimes people within the organization of the importance of that. And we gave you some tools and some starting points that you could take on to do that yourself. And this might be a helpful tool in what we'll be discussing today, which is indeed UX maturity. Now, what is UX or user experience maturity of a company? Well, we can actually see it as when we look at this model that I also showed you last time. This is the human-centered design process. So, and it's a standard definition that is understood as a very important way, has different elements that are important when involving your users in the design process. It's really starting from understanding the context of use, specifying user requirements based on that, producing design solutions, then evaluating them, and then have like this iterative process. Now, when is a company UX mature, user experience mature? You could say that it's when a company really has this method, this approach at the center of the organization, where the user needs are the center point of attention in the business, and we'll talk about that in a minute a bit in more depth, and where this process forms the basis of the methods and the approaches that are being used to go towards what is then the end goal, creating a great user experience for the end users of the products and services that that company creates or provides. Now, I can say there's a lot of companies that as I mentioned last time as well, that claim to be UX-centered or human-centered or user-driven that actually do not implement this process. So what people that are really invested in human-centered design have done over the past years, you could say the past 20 years, it really has been a focus of attention, is looking at, okay, how can you decide more objectively whether a company is really having this human-centered design process at its core and really the user needs as a central tenet, and especially also how can you move forward? Now, to show you that it's still a concern, because sometimes we have some user experience experts here online as well with us, and you all know that it's, although we might think that it's progressing, and it is progressing, of course, the need for user experience, especially, there's a question of that, but still in 2018, not too long ago, when McKinsey surveyed the companies that are active in various products and services, or design at least of their products and services, that there are still 40% that aren't talking to their end users during the development process. And let me be clear here, it says just even talking to their end users, which means that if you really go into the actual methods and the good way of doing human-centered design, probably the percentage is even much higher. So a lot of companies are actually not really involving their end users in any way in their design or development process. Over 50% admitted that they have no way to assess for their design teams what the output is, what the targets are for the outputs, if the output is good or not. So that's also a lot that are not really kind of measuring how their design teams are performing. And then, of course, when it comes to creating or giving resources to design functions, yeah, senior leaders are often very reluctant. And if there is budget for that, often it's the first thing that gets cut. So just to show that it's still an important aspect to take into account and that we are not there yet, that it's not all the talk about how important end users are, user-driven, customer-driven user experience, but still a lot of companies are not actually walking the talk, if they even talk about it. Now, about 15 years ago, the Nielsen Norman Group, I think most of you know them, Jacob Nielsen is one of the founders of the usability field, along with Donald Norman. They have actually 15 years ago created what they call the user experience maturity model to look at, okay, how far are companies in that? I'll quickly go through it just to give you an idea of the various steps, but I want to especially take some time later on to look at how you can see whether your company is UX mature or not, and especially then how you can move on that ladder. Oh, this goes one too far. Starting with like the bottom line that they at that moment defined was hostility. Companies that are really like hostile, that say, no, we don't want anything to do with this user experience or usability, and that really kind of try to deter it. The next step is then developer-centered, where maybe people are starting to see that it's important to keep the user in mind, but still they see it from the perspective of the developers themselves, and they don't really have any activities or people that are concentrated working on that or doing any activities. And then comes actually the first step where really the small initiatives, maybe some individuals or very small teams are starting to doing some user activities, usually some user testing, because that gets like the most quickly results, usually also at the end of the chain or design process and not in the beginning, but at least some small initiatives are occurring. Then the next step is where there are actually dedicated budgets, not really a lot usually, but at least there are some teams that get a dedicated budget for doing this user research. And then when we get higher on the ladder, there it gets more managers that get appointed, and then you really get teams that form around that, and the company becomes more aware and more focused on really being user-centered. The processes become more systematic, where human-centered design is involved. Also some iterative design becomes involved, and then we move more towards really a user-driven or customer-driven organization when you see that the KPIs are integrated with the UX goals, when finally you have what they call here a user-driven corporation. Now, I'm not going to already talk for my colleague Arnaud, who's next week going to talk about the flaws of these kind of models and how they are relatively limited. I'll leave that to you, Arnaud. But let me just focus here, especially on here we really focus on how human-centered design is integrated into the company. So these levels, 15 years ago, they were defined. And also when Nielsen was asked, okay, how long does it take to progress through these levels? He was like, yeah, it can take up to 20 years to go from hostility, the lower levels, to a user-driven corporation. Now, this was 15 years ago, and actually the world is moving very fast. Human-centered design is also getting more and more traction, and actually probably this timeline is not really very relevant anymore, as well as the process itself, and I'll come back to that in a minute as well. Now, here's another maturity model that I just want to put next to it, not to just show Nielsen Norman's model, but here you have Renato Feijel. He created a more simple model, and the first one had 8 different levels. This one has 6 different levels, but actually the steps are more or less the same, right? It's going from unrecognized, maybe the hostility is not so much here, but UX is not seen as very important. You get to the interested stage, people are interested. Oh, there is some these small initiatives, but little funding. In the next one, again, you get more budget, you get more programs, you maybe get a manager already, you get to the committed stage where it's critical executives are more actively involved. And then in levels 5 and 6, there you see that you have these KPIs that were talked about in the previous models, really being the user as the center of the company itself. It's not a separate thing, but integrated within the company organization. That's actually where the actual user-driven companies are. Now, Nielsen Norman also hasn't stopped with their model of 15 years ago. They have created actually very recently a new model. You can find the URL there where you can find more details about it as well, where they said, okay, we looked at how the state was of user-centered design, human-centered design in the past years, and they created these new 6-step levels. They presented as, yeah, this is like somewhat different than you, but again, you see similar structure here, similar approach. There's not that much difference here, maybe some different wording of both the levels as well as the how they describe it, but the principle is the same. In the beginning, it's ignored. It's maybe not even there, or they don't even know what UX is, that it's important. Then you get some limited, uneven, haphazard steps to take, and some aspiration. Yeah, we want to do something, but we don't know yet very much what. Then it starts to emerge, but still inconsistent and inefficient. And then the 4th step is where a lot of companies that are doing human-centered design in a good way are actually already at. That means like it's partly systematic, it's more or less effective, probably could do more, but a lot of companies that arrive at this stage are already doing a good job in applying human-centered design methods. Of course, you really want to move forward if you want to be a user-driven company, to go into a more integrated system where you really have, again, as I mentioned, the KPIs, and I'll come back to that later in these steps as well when you want to move forward there. And aim for being a user-driven company, which is very rare, of course, companies that really attain that highest stage. So that's for me doing the talking, and last Wednesday I tried to get some interactivity, but I understand that it's in this webinar format not so easy, so I took a different approach this time, and we created a UX maturity quiz or poll, let's say. So I'm going to ask you some questions, and I just want to get a bit of a reaction to see how well you, in the first questions, how well you assess certain topics, but I see that there's some UX specialists online, so I'm interested to see what the results will be there. And the final step to look at more on the organization level. So let's get the first poll started, and I'll go to launch it. Let's see if this all works. Yep. So please answer the questions. There's no I don't know option or both options. You have to choose one. just think what is the best statement. So the first statement is the question whether both is true. Either usability is subjective and cannot be measured, or usability will decrease development time. So please answer the question. The second question is, what do you do when users do not know what an icon in your interface means? Do you add a descriptive label to the icon, or do you provide a clear explanation in the user manual? And the third one is a true or false question. You have a user interface with 3 buttons. Is that easier to use than a user interface with 10 buttons? I'll give you a couple of seconds, but not too long. Please let me know your answers. I was going to say there's no right or wrong, but maybe there is in this case, but it's more to get the discussion started. So don't worry if you think of, I'm not sure about either of those. Good, I have already a couple of answers. I don't know if there's one more that is still waiting to answer. I'll give you 10 more seconds. And then I'm going to show the results. All right, so I hope you can see the results all. The first one, the statement that is true, yeah, especially if you attended last session, but also if you have experience, you know that usability can be measured. And so the right answer here is it will decrease development time indeed. But that's a lot what we hear in companies or people within companies that are not so informed about usability, that are hostile towards usability. The argument they often use is it's subjective. Okay, everyone, this one says it's blue and another one says red, so what can you do, right? So that's something that, and we'll go back to that, needs some awareness about what UX is actually and what it can do. Interestingly, one person said in the second question to provide a clear explanation in the user manual for an icon in your interface. Well, here the fallback option that a lot of developers have when something doesn't work in the interface is to explain it in the user manual. But users don't actually read the user manual unless they really have to. So the best option is always to make sure that you can look at the interface and make sure that the interface is more clear in itself. And the last one, oh, that's a nice one that has a little bit of two sides here. 2 people said that it's true that an interface with 3 buttons is easier to use than one with 10 buttons. Well, also here, there's some discussion about that, but mainly when you have only 3 buttons, it can be very difficult to use as well. I have some examples that from interfaces with just 2 buttons, where a red and a blue are being used, where the red button is to take out a card, for example, it doesn't work. So it's not per se so that 3 buttons are better or easier to use than 10 buttons, because the 10 button interface could be designed much better. So that's to give you some idea of how, especially in this beginning phase, there's still a lot of confusion of what is the best approach. And this is where you can really work on UX awareness. I'll come back to that in a minute. I'll go to the second poll. And please don't take too long to answer, so we can move on and discuss a little bit the results. Just the first thing that comes in mind is fine. So the first question is, which task would you never give your users during a user test? So never. Which task would you not give to your users? Letting them explore the application on their own so they can get familiar with it before you do the actual user test, or give them a task that is not possible to complete with the application? That's the first question. Second question is, when you could only do one of these following activities, which one would you choose? So if you can only do one activity, would you do a user test with an early paper prototype, or only a user test with the final product right before launch? And then the third question is, you want to know what your users need. Which technique is most effective to find out? Is it better to use observation of user behavior in a natural context, or is it better to do focus groups with different user groups to discuss potential features? All right, I'll give you some time to answer the poll. Again, don't worry about if you're doubting, just choose the one that appears the best. It's anonymous, so we cannot identify you if you don't you haven't incorrect. Okay, 10 more seconds. All right, so I will end the poll and share the results. So the first question, which task would you never give your users during a user test? That's an interesting one. About 67% said that you never let users explore the application on their own to get familiar with it, and 33% said a task that is not possible to complete with the application. That's an interesting one, because here it's actually when you let users explore your application on their own to get familiar with it, often you cannot really test the interface in a natural way, because in most situations, people start right away. They want to start right away with using the software or product for what it is being used, and not, oh, let me take some time to first explore it. So it's much more natural to give them straight away to the actual task. And the second option in that answer, the task that is not possible to complete with the application, that's a very interesting task to give to users. Because if you give that task, it also creates for them a way to think like, oh, this should be possible with the interface, but I cannot find how it works. And that reflects also a real situation that you often don't know what is possible with an interface. You start a task and sometimes you give up before you know whether it's possible to do it with that interface or not. So the first one is something that I would say to never give your users during a user test. The second question, when you could only do one of these activities, what would you choose? A user test with an early prototype that got 83% of the answers is indeed better to do, because you can early on already get a lot of feedback on what people like, want, and so on, and really inform the design. While if you do it right before launch, it will be very difficult to still make changes if you find fundamental flaws, and it will not be so easy to or very, very expensive also to if you want to make changes still. And then the third question, the technique to know what your users need. Here, 33% still said focus groups with different user groups to discuss potential features. But if you do that without any context, you actually can get false results, people that give you any features that actually they won't use. So it's actually best to observe people in their natural context. Now, this is not a masterclass in human-centric design, but I just wanted to show you that at the next levels of UX maturity, so when you go to the lowest levels to a bit higher, then knowledge about the processes becomes very important. And it's important to see how you would actually perform these methods, because there's a skill to it, of course, and that's what you should be teaching your people. Good. I'll start the third poll. We have two more to go. And again, here we're talking a bit more about methods here. So I will go through the questions with you, but you can answer already, of course, if you know the answer. The first question is, which of the following is better to uncover as many usability issues as possible? Is it best to do one user test, big one, with 50 users? Or is it better to do 3 user tests with 5 users each and make some changes in between? The second question is, you have a discussion in your team about a design feature, and how will you decide what you will implement? Will you use accepted usability principles as guideline to decide whether to implement this or that feature, or will you do an A/B test with actual users? And the third question is, which of the two following situations is worse? You cannot do a user test in the actual environment of the users, so you will have to use a lab or a meeting room for that, or you cannot recruit actual users for your user tests, and you will have to use students or colleagues to do these tests. Again, I'll give you a bit of time to vote. Okay, I'll give you 10 more seconds. Okay, and will share the results with you. So nice. The first had 100% on the second answer. It's indeed better to do 3 user tests with 5 users each, make changes in between, because then you can kind of repair some issues, find more issues, make sure that you design it again and redesign it, and you will indeed end up with a better interface than when you do 1 test with 50 users. The second question is discussion in your team about design features when you use accepted usability principles or run an A/B tests. 17% still said use the accepted usability principles, but a problem with that is that these accepted usability principles are sometimes not specific for your situation, for the people that you're designing for the context. So an A/B test will actually have better results in showing what people will actually click on. And then the third question, which of the situations is worse, not being in the actual environment or not having the actual users? Again, 70% said not in the actual environment, but that's actually something that is less of an issue. It's of course better to have it in the actual environment, but not having actual users is much worse, because then you will not see what they actually click on in a real life situation, because they are not the target users that you're designing for. So here we're actually moving up the ladder with these type of questions as well, because here it comes on subtleties in the design process, on things that you even are up for discussion here and there, where you could say, well, but some usability principles might be good, or but maybe we can do this or that together. So it starts to become a more subtle one. And I will move on to the final poll, and then we will discuss a bit more on moving up this ladder. This has more to do with your organization. Now, I know that there are some UX people here on board. If that it's more difficult to say that for your own UX organization, let's say. If that's the case, you can also, of course, think of an organization that you worked in. Of course, if you're a UX specialist working in not in a UX consultancy agency, then of course you can talk about your company, because then it will be very relevant to the type of questions that are coming here. So on to the questions. The first question is here: does your organization have 1 or more UX teams that are working on multiple projects? So this is not a question whether it's true or not. This is a question whether for your organization, what is the case? And I'll discuss that when moving up the ladder. The second question is, do most projects in your company employ an iterative human-centered design process, including a discovery phase? So there's the first phase where you try to understand the user needs. And the third question is UX part of your organization's KPIs and the company vision? Okay, I'm waiting for a couple more people to vote. I'll give 10 more seconds. Okay, then I will end the poll and share the results with you, which are very interesting, I must say. So 80% said that their organization have 1 or more UX teams working on multiple projects. This is nice, because that's indeed where you are in that stage where you have teams forming, where you have probably management also involved, where there's probably dedicated budgets on that as well. And that's where you see that you're at the stage with a company that's really moving to a more user-driven corporation. However, if you look at the second question, you see that it's vice versa, that it's only 20% of people that answered that most projects employ an iterative process, including a discovery phase. So I think that that's really a step where, when moving forwards on the ladder, there's still a lot of work to do in a lot of companies. And then, interestingly, also the third question, whether UX is part of an organization's KPIs and a company vision, it's like a mixed thing. There's 40% that said yes and 60% no, which means that there are indeed some companies that maybe are having UX as part of the KPIs, but not really fully committing still to this iterative design process. Okay, thank you for being active in the polls. And this brings me to the last part of today's session. And please, if you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat so I can address them still at the end. How do you climb the ladder of UX maturity? And here I'm going to share with you some steps that you can take in order to climb this ladder. Now, I will, let's say, more or less start from the bottom, but I must also say that it's not really a question of when you're at level 1, you have to do this to go to level 2. It's something that you have addressed at different levels. So it can be that some of those steps you might be doing in a different order than how they are listed here on the slide. All of them are necessary, even in companies that are already a bit further on the ladder. The first one is building UX awareness. So especially, let's say that you're really at the bottom and there's no interest in or no knowledge about usability. How do you start with building UX awareness then? Well, of course, it depends. Sometimes when a company is completely oblivious, no one maybe is even looking for doing anything about UX. On the other hand, there might be external forces that are forcing a company to really take steps towards becoming more customer-centered, user-centered, human-centered, whatever words you want to use. But I'm not will go into that. So there might be legal reasons for doing that. There might be competition that is really showcasing their UX results. There might be user demand, people demanding that it's more user-friendly. So this actually might help in building UX really awareness that is important. But then, of course, you need to start within the company to build UX awareness. There might also be individuals within the company, someone that has read something or saw an interesting video about it, and that, hey, this is something that we should be doing. And then, of course, it's how, if you have the individual or the external sources, how do you bring then UX knowledge into the company? Well, you can start with short training programs, maybe introducing key literature, if you're that individual that wants to do that. Maybe get a ROI session to show how the return on investment is of user experience. And there might be even a possibility to create a small team, like bottom up, maybe with not a lot of budget, but that experiments with some methods or design thinking, maybe first in a short program, training program, to kind of actually be able to showcase what UX can do. And that brings us to the next step. As soon as you have starting to build some awareness and being able to do something within the company, then you need to really showcase your UX results to as many people as possible. And first, of course, start building from the people around you, maybe the developers themselves, and slowly moving, but I'll look at that later, to management. But it's like showcasing what can create a case study that shows the value of human-centered design. Invite key people to sit into your user tests, that you can show how valuable it is to get feedback. Maybe extend these short UX trainings to have a bit more variation in methods, and include more teams, for example, in that process as well. So that's the next step, to showcase the results, to see, hey, we're doing some little things here, but they really bring some value to the company. And then when that is actually kind of gets the ball rolling, let's say, then you can slowly start building a human-centered culture. Then you can start building routines. For example, say, okay, let's do these user tests regularly, because it's not too expensive. And if we do that on a regular basis, see how much results we bring in. Bring some variety in the methods in there. Say, hey, we cannot only do user testing, we can also do some card sorting on a more earlier phase, or do some prototyping as well. And see if you can also get in some iterative design. Hey, we did one user test, but we should really improve that and see that if we can test it again. And then you can also slowly start to get support for human-centered design at a higher level. See if you can get some budget available, maybe see if you can get a dedicated UX team of 2 or 3 people, and make sure that UX starts becoming a priority. And then, of course, the next step is to make sure that if you want to move on to the ladder, you have to get company leaders on board. And depending on how big your company is, you might have to start slower and go really moving up the chain in your company. Advocate the company leaders that are receptive to human-centered design, that are maybe already have been sitting on user tests. Try to get it on the board, on meetings, how important that is. Keep showing how UX can also lead to company success. So not just the success of this specific test, but also how it can really help your company forward. And then also start arguing for giving more to that discovery. And that's what I saw in the poll. I saw that the discovery phase probably, or the iterative aspect, is something that is not really yet, even in companies that are already find it important to doing human-centered design or have UX teams. Make sure that you argue also for the importance of what it can bring to the table there. Also, it helps here, and this is something where I say where the steps mix in a little bit, make sure that you also show how the UX metrics link with your company KPIs. That's something that we discussed in a previous session on ROI of UX. It's the fact that you need to show that the UX metrics contribute to the success of your company, because then you will get higher up and then you can convince higher management also how important this user experience measures are. Also, maybe at a certain moment it might be linked to bonus, where if a great user experience, a great user feedback is coming, that people can get a bonus there. And then human-centered design can become an integrated part, hopefully, within projects, become proactive also, rather than, okay, let's do this because everyone else is doing this. And then slowly the business goals might become aligned with actually what the user goals are. And then you move to a user-driven company. But of course, that last step is the hard one. And then you really need the whole company, including the top leadership being involved with that. And then the crucial part is to keep the momentum, because it's very easy for companies when they grow, when they acquire other companies or being acquired, when maybe strategies are updated or new products are being added to the product line, that again, this like attention to human-centered design slows down. So keep advocating, even if your company is already doing well at the highest level, to make sure that you keep your company human-centered. Okay, I hope that this has given you some insights into UX maturity models, how they evolved, where you might be or your company might be on this ladder, and especially how you can move up the ladder. But as I said, next week, Arnaud will discuss how we at U.Sentric also have said, okay, we want to move a bit forward, going further and broader than this human-centered or UX maturity model, and that we think you need to embed it more into a customer-driven company. And he will discuss a new model and approach that we have created here. But for now, I would like to thank you for joining me. If there's any questions, there's still a possibility to ask them. So thank you all for joining me today. I wish you a very nice Friday afternoon and a very nice start of your